Hey, so in this video, I'll be demonstrating on how to modify a below knee socket. First, usually sockets come with measurements and markings already on it. This one did not. So first I have to start out by marking everything. First I mark where the PTB is, which is your patella tendon bar. Then I try to, form that correlation and knowing what side it is. It's a right limb. So the fib head is usually down and across from it. And then I will go ahead and mark where the posterior trim line is, which it's usually when you pick up the socket and move into three degrees of flexion, it'll be across from your bar. And once I do that, I quickly draw on the tibia ridge, which is fairly obvious where it is where the point is on the anterior part of the socket. Once I get everything marked, I will take a half round and dig out the PTB about half the thickness of the rasp, and making sure that it is level and in line with the tibial ridge. So by the time I'm done, the two pressures between the PTB and the gastric will form a triangle with the tibial ridge. So I'm checking, making sure it's level, looking down it, looking down the socket, and now, yep, so checking it. Now, grind a little more, recheck again. And once I'm done with that, I will take another rasp, another full round, and start doing the back. So when doing the posterior, it is very important to make sure that you go slow and you constantly check that you're parallel with the PTB. Um, it's really easy to get carried away and grind too much. I try to do the same thickness, about half of the full round deep, and then I'll, recheck it, make sure I'm a little off, so I'll grind a little more. Um, and then, yeah, once I'm happy, I'll move on to taking down uh, the gastric area and the posterior of the socket. Oh, I lied. Before I do that, I take a full round and I will round the patella, kind of shaping the patella and making that blended area between the patella and the tibia. So once that's marked, once that's all that's done, I will take a half round and rasp down the posterior down to where that first dig out is. Um, then once that's done, I will slowly taper it in. Again, I'll make sure to rotate it, make sure I'm creating a flat surface that is going to be, parallel with everything, make sure everything's flat and the forces are going with each other, to be able to push the tibia into the recess I will build later. Then once I'm happy with it, I'll adjust a little more. And once I'm happy with it, I will sit there and take down the two sharp edges up behind. I'll blend those in and make sure it's not a harsh transition between the posterior and the medial and lateral. I'll just clean it up a bit more. Right now, I'm cleaning up all of the uh, casting marks to make the plaster ready for adding additional plaster. Um, is the plaster sticks and blends a lot better when it has a rasp texture to it and it does not have the original cast. Casted plaster, it takes the chemicals off the cast and it can prevent blending with plaster. So before I start, I'll scratch the entire mold up, shape the bottom a little bit to get rid of those casting deformities, rid of some of the roping, some of the imprints from socks and stuff like that. Just getting a nice clean mold. Then I'll take a staple gun and I'll do on the tibial ridge, I will shoot about 3 or 4 staples into the tibial ridge, do it leaving about a 1/4 inch showing, and then I'll do one on the fib head and have that one about an 1/8 inch. These are to help the plaster hold on to the leg, and also it'll help me later on when I'm rasping to be able to have a depth gauge for how much material I remove, because I want my tibial ridge being about a 1/4 inch build up with my fib head being about an 1/8 inch. So once that's done, I will, recheck the leg, make sure I didn't forget anything. It looks good. I'll mix plaster. I mix my plaster a little runny. This is a little thicker than I usually do, but I usually do it pretty runny, so it helps with binding to the plaster. Wet plaster will bind better to the pre-existing plaster a lot better than dry or more, concrete feeling plaster. But here I'm filling the tibial ridge, building it up slowly. I like to put all my plaster in the center of something and then kind of go back and forth with my spatula to make it uh, fall off on the two edges to kind of make a natural slope. I've always found that, easier than trying to just make one. And I'm building up the distal tib. With how wet I do my plaster, I have to wait and let it harden up a little bit before I can really shape it a little. I'm adding way more than I need because I would much rather mix plaster once and then shape it and be done than to try to perfectly make the socket and have to make more things of plaster later on because I didn't have enough or I didn't do enough. So I'd rather do way more than needed than to be redundant with mixing plaster. So once I'm done blending and putting plaster on the tibial ridge, I will take and start building up the PTB and the patella. So when I build a patella, I'll just drop a couple of dollops on the patella, kind of cream it back and forth. It'll create two pools going off to the medial and lateral, and then I'll take it at an angle. I take my spatula at an angle and build up those trim lines, and then um, kind of move it around. And I'll also do a dollop of plaster right in the middle of the patella tendon bar. This is, not the most common thing, but I do it so when the patient moves their leg, their patella tendon still has somewhere to go and it is not being just pressed on by the socket. but it's so, both sides still holding it, but in the middle it gives it some room to go. So once I'm done with that, I'll move it over to do a build up on the fib head. The fib head is pretty easy. I just do one little dollop. I kind of give it a wide taper. Um, this is just, just relief for the fib head. It's nothing too crazy. Uh, just kind of blend it into a circle. I'll take most of that down later on. So after that, I will move on to the last part, which is adding plaster to build the uh, posterior wall and the posterior part of the medial lateral ears of the socket. Um, I'm not. Ooh, never mind. It was still a little too wet to move, so I got to fix that. So I'll wait a little bit, let it harden up a little more, make sure it's not going to do the same thing again. Then I will start. Now I will for real start working on the posterior. So I start by just, putting in a couple of dollops, then start shaping them up. Again, I use way too much plaster for this. I'll take it down later. Um, I know this isn't the most efficient way to do it, but it works. Just kind of build it up, lay it down, create that wall, make sure it's, extended out from the most, either most medial pointing out spot or the lateral to give space for the patient's thigh to be able to move through that space. So the top of that original dugout I did on the posterior will be the top of my trim line. So um, I'll add a bunch of plaster there, but I'll end up knocking it down later. Then I will do I'll shape two divots sort of for the hamstrings to still be able to fire, but still be able to create a high posterior wall to maintain control on the patient's leg. This one I'm actually not doing too bad. Usually I will fumble for this for way longer and kind of just try to make it perfect, but I just kind of, yeah. And when you're modifying, you got to make sure you keep your spatula clean when you're trying to modify plaster, or it'll start clumping. Helps to have it wet, but I just haven't. I'm just too lazy to have a cup of water over there. So I'm, still just building up that posterior wall. I got to where I'm happy with it on the, was that the medial plane, but I'm just trying to make sure it's far enough back, um, so it'll reach to where I'm going to build up my posterior. You can see I'm trying to go ahead and pre-shape, uh, where the hamstrings will be. I think I do end up giving up and I just do a big block though. So I make sure that the surface that I'm adding plaster to is straight up. That way it won't try to slop down either down the sides or, just making sure it stays where it's supposed to be. So I'm building up the lateral wall, just filling it all in. I use a lot more plaster than needed, but I'd rather have too much than too little. So here I am. I'm leveling out the posterior wall. I decided I'm going to do that shape later on when it hardens instead of trying to pre-shape it before. So now I'm cleaning up the cut marks that I did to get the cast off the plaster mold. So once it's hardened, I'll take a half round, start removing material off the anterior first, kind of shaping my front part, making sure the trim line looks good and shaping the knee, patella, the fib head. I kind of just go everywhere. Um, you generally speaking, you'll want to have the two spots on either side of the medial ridge flat and taken down a bit, so it gives a peak for the tibia to move into with the pressure from the posterior. So I'm just shaping, and I will remove material down on the sides to give it a point. Um, then I will take material off the top until I find my staples. I am checking, making sure um, I have enough space for my trim lines. I didn't know if I built it up enough or how much I need to take down. Generally speaking, your anterior trim line and the patella needs to be 2 fingered widths from the bar. So there's 2 of my staples. I didn't do it too crazy on the finding the last one, since this practitioner generally does like a more built up distal tibia. So I kind of just let it chill. Then I shape the patella, kind of going back and forth, making sure it's round, no bumps, no edges. Make sure it's a clean swoop. Take more off the sides. Make sure everything's rounded and blended in. So I'll start with the posterior. Get the backs moved in. I lied. I'm not starting on posterior yet. Am I now? There we go. Now I'm starting posterior. So I'm knocking down the plaster that I added on to cover up the cut lines. And then move down to the distal, get that crap off. I start leveling out the sides, making sure everything's nice and blended again. Doing a pretty light rasp on most of this, just so I don't take off too much when I'm just doing general rasps. And then I'll go pretty hard on the back, leveling it out, getting it flat on the posterior, so I can have a leveled starting spot for doing my swoop in the posterior. So I'm drawing the posterior trim line now. Just want to make sure you have 2 swoops. The lateral one will be more on the outside than the medial. I just kind of did it in the dead center here. But usually you want your medial one being in the straight back. You want your lateral one being slightly on the lateral and the posterior. So I'm using a farrier's tool to kind of scoop out the plaster and where I want in that ridge because I just want a nice gradual. Well, I don't want not gradual. I want a nice swirl, nice scoop. Um, so it builds a shelf instead of just a blended out area. Take this all the way around, kind of roughing, doing the hamstrings. I'll go back later with a um, rasp and clean it up, and I'll sand screen it to where it blends in really good. So I'll take a full round, go around these, and really shape them. And I forgot my plastic in the oven. I was trying. I This is a bilateral set. I modified the other one earlier that day, and I was going to pull it while I was modifying. I let time get a hold of me. I was going to cut this out of the video, but I thought it was funny, so I left it in. Yep, there it is. It's not my first time, and I'm sure it will not be my last doing that. But what can you do? I turned the oven off in a fit of rage. So here I am again, just making sure that posterior is a nice swoop. A lot of this will be blended out with sand screen. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And then I will take, once I'm done with this, kind of clean it up some more, take a wet sponge and sand screen and just smooth it up, get rid of the marks, then it's ready for pull.